All right, well, it's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the 2025 UCLA Tarjan Center Forum in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities, Pete Cervinka. Let's see, is Pete with us? He'll be with us shortly. Let me go ahead and give you a little background about Pete. So, Pete was appointed director of the California Department of Developmental Services, or DDS. There he is. Hi, Pete. Good to see you.
All right, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. I'm just giving a little background about you to our audience here. So Pete was appointed director of the California Department of Developmental Services, or DDS, in December of 2024 by Governor Gavin Newsom. Prior to his appointment, he served 4 months as acting director of the department. He has more than 25 years of leadership, program management, and policy development experience in various roles across state agencies. Pete joined DDS in 2020 when he was appointed as Chief of Data Analytics and Strategy by Governor Newsom. He's held several other executive branch positions, including Chief Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer for the California Department of Social Services, and Assistant Secretary with the California Health and Human Services Agency. He also worked at the California Department of Finance and Cal EPA, and Pete holds 2 degrees from the University of California at Davis. Pete is a strong advocate for using comprehensive data to improve outcomes for Californians with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Throughout his career, he's guided government programs to consider how family and culture affects each person that's served. He also seeks to advance care in the community for individuals throughout their lifespan, considering social, health, and environmental factors. And, he really, you'll see, but he is truly an inspiring leader. He's beloved by his team. I'm finding that more and more. And he's truly, well, it's just truly an honor to have you here today, Pete. So thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me and also in your introduction validating that I am in fact as old as I feel. So thanks.
Well, we are so excited to learn from all of your expertise today. Before I begin our Q&A with Pete, I also want to note that many of the questions that we're going to be asking and discussing today were generated by our Tarjan Center Advisory Committee, along with members of our broader community, which includes self-advocates, family members, service providers, and other key stakeholders. And we really believe that their input reflects the diverse perspectives and priorities that shape our system. And so we're really grateful to them for their thoughtful questions and contributions. But we also want to encourage this to be an interactive session. So we'd be happy to take live questions from the audience. So throughout the conversation, you can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar. And we'll do our best to include as many of them as possible in the discussion. So with that, again, I'm really delighted to be moderating what I think promises to be a very important conversation about the future of California's developmental services system, including where we're headed, how we'll get there, and what it all means for individuals and families across the state. So, Pete, let's get started by looking ahead to the big picture. So, to kick us off, as California evolves, what is your long-term vision for the developmental services system in the next 10 to 15 years?
Hey, this is a wonderful question and very, very much tied to what I'm responsible for, which is planning for the future. So I really appreciate the leading out, but it's also a little bit of a blank slate because none of us have a crystal ball. So all you get is my opinion here.
Okay.
Yeah, as a system, we've really experienced absolutely incredible growth in the last couple of years. Coming out of the COVID experience, we've seen our caseload explode, the demand for services and supports really explode. And it's due to a number of things. We've seen a lot of efforts to outreach to the early start population to capture kids 0 to 3 is age 0 to 3 and get services to them when it matters the most. And now we're seeing them really in early start. We're exceeding the pre-COVID trend line that we would have expected, which is really phenomenal in terms of our impact on life trajectories for them. We're also seeing those kids now aging into the Lanterman Act program. And we've also seen dramatic increases in access to autism diagnosis in the medical community. And just in the last 2 years alone, we've essentially added a mid-sized regional center each year to our system. Now, I know your question is, what does it mean for the future? That's the current situation, but where we are and what we're experiencing really matters for that. And I think there's really two things, but although there are others that I'm sure we'll talk about today that really speak to the future. One, we've got to move past the expectation that we can serve 500,000 people successfully every year using 45-year-old computers. And also that regional centers can adequately assess eligibility and provide timely access to service and successfully manage that service with service coordinators using a funding level that's tied to 1990, 35 years ago. No business in America would operate that way, and we just have to do better. So I really hope 10 or 15 years from now, the effort that we're going through now to design and eventually implement the Life Outcome Improvement System, or LOIS project, has been successful. I really believe people ought to be able to access and update their own information and communicate with regional centers whenever they want to do that, just like you and I would do mobile banking or mobile healthcare with our healthcare provider. And they should be able to do it at 11 o'clock at night in their pajamas from home if they want to do that. We also need to be funding regional centers adequately to meet the expectations that we have for them. And there need to be practical and understandable transparency around those expectations and their performance. We need a robust provider network in the future, adequately compensated and skilled workforce, and big enough that people can both have their needs met, but also have choice in how they meet those needs. We've got to move beyond paying for units of service, which we've done since this system was created, and really start thinking about how we pay for services that actually improve outcomes for people and that we have the infrastructure to measure those outcome improvements. Even if it's just a survey about people, like, is your life getting better as a result of X? But also to be able to quantify their health outcomes, for example. And we need to do all of this in a person-centered or family-centered way, which means, yes, we always talk about the Lanterman entitlement in California, but it's an entitlement to a choice among available services after all other options for those services and supports have been exhausted. And it's a huge burden on our families to document that they have gone to medical insurance, that they've exhausted their K-12 appeals. So, don't misunderstand. We have a lot of work to do. We do successfully serve hundreds of thousands of people every month. And the vast majority of them tell us we are, in fact, meeting their needs and they're happy with their services and service providers, and that those things are making a positive difference. But I know that in the future we can and must do better. I swear that will be the longest answer I try to give you today. But it is fun to speculate about what the future might hold.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I mean, sign us up, Pete. That sounds great. It's a very powerful and also really pragmatic vision. I so appreciate that. The pragmatism of things like making communication even more accessible with service coordinators and, increasing and improving the technology that we use to do that. I mean, that definitely can create barriers to access if it's outdated, and as you're mentioning. So we appreciate that powerful and pragmatic vision. Thank you for sharing that. So now that we have a sense of what the future might look like, I'd love to dig into how we get there, right? So we just talked about the kind of the what. I'd love to talk about the how. You talked a little bit about the how there, but what will or how will DDS accomplish these goals, including kind of what infrastructure changes do you foresee kind of based on this new vision? And not to get too complicated, but also kind of related to that, how is DDS preparing for the needs of a growing and increasingly diverse population of individuals with developmental disabilities?
Yeah, so many awesome questions. I think first I would say DDS doesn't accomplish anything on its own. And, we can write great letters, and if nobody reads them and nobody implements them, we're not helpful. If we're not successful getting funding from the federal government or state government, we're not successful either. And so one of the things that I'm most excited about are the expanding partnerships that we have with regional centers and service providers, with labor representatives, and just across the board, we're making just tremendous amount of effort to include the voice of individuals and families who are actually receiving the services in everything that we do, from policy development to feedback on their own individual experiences. A lot more communication is happening. We have a monthly newsletter now. Then the next one will probably come out on Monday or Tuesday next week. We're using newsletters and social media more and more to share information with people. We're buying inside baseball at the department new software that will enable for the first time people to sign up to get info about topics that are of interest to them. So if all you care about is employment and you don't want the rest, you could sign up for stuff to get it from us related to employment. So just trying to make it easier to get information, to share information. Um, Great partnerships with the legislature and the rest of the administration. There are lots of things that are mandatory priorities for spending, and our system is lucky to be one of them with the Lanterman Act entitlement. But I won't dwell on federal and state budget uncertainties and some policy uncertainties there. But being able to navigate that with our partners is really huge in our ability to protect what we're doing. I already went on and on about information technology and case management and fiscal systems. The lowest projects underway on the 30th, to shamelessly plug 6 days from now, we're going to do a webinar to recap everything that we've heard from people about what they want to do with IT. We're really thrilled about the level of engagement and excitement that people have in that project. And I would of course be remiss not to mention, we're still, effectively January earlier this year, we fully implemented rate reform in California, but fully implemented, we're still working on it. Regional centers have till the end of the calendar year to get all of their providers lined up in the appropriate service codes with the right rates. And we're still continuing. Even yesterday, we issued more instructions on what the right rate is for transportation brokers. So we're continuing to refine that. But it's really capped a multi-billion-dollar investment in our service provider network and in the wages of the workforce that those service providers employ. It's a dramatic investment. I'm sure I know there are people who say it's never enough, that it's already outdated, but it's a huge improvement from where we were and gives us a strong foundation, a more organized foundation to build on. So those are just some of the things going on infrastructure wise to kind of plan ahead as a system for that. If you're tired of just hearing that list, you have my full empathy, and we're really appreciative of all the partners in those efforts across the board.
Yeah, I really appreciate your emphasis on these partnerships. I mean, you leveraging those relationships, I think, is really how you can really create a lot of meaningful change. So your vision looks amazing. Your event that's coming up in 6 days also sounds very interesting, and I'm sure there are people that would love to attend. Maybe on the side we can be getting a link and putting that in the chat for our audience if they're interested in attending. Pete, I've heard you talk a lot about inclusion and community impact. And that kind of leads to the next question, which is what role do you see for community inclusion employment, which I know is also a big passion of yours, and housing in shaping the future?
Yeah, all great questions, right? So inclusion is very much the point, I think. Um, Everybody has a right to live in the community to the maximum extent possible in ways that meet their needs. And also, I think inclusion aligned with individual outcomes that people have as identified in their individual program plans or their individual family support plan. Um, that's really the entire point of what we're trying to do. There's a portion of folks that want employment, and for people who want it, employment provides purpose. Uh, but more importantly, it also provides vital income supports, both to the individual and the family. And so for those who want it, we should be doing much better than we are. There were studies that hit the media just yesterday, in fact, talking about the unemployment rate for people with disabilities writ large, not just intellectual and developmental disabilities, but disabilities generally, being more than double the national average for everybody else. This is a great opportunity for us to do more and do better, to learn from other states that are having better successes than we do, and trying to shape our programs, our incentives, um, and our supports for people in ways that make it. Today is, I guess, my day too to be the old theme. I suppose you're old when you start quoting Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For those,
Oh my God, Pete, I did that like a week ago. That's crazy that you're saying that right now. I did. So that makes me old. Is that what you're saying, Pete?
well, I suppose old is also a feeling, but I think it was first published in 1950, so it's been around for a while.
Yeah.
Um, and his hierarchy of needs really steps through the basics. It's a five-step pyramid, and I'm not going to regurgitate it to everybody, but at the foundation of it, basically it says if you don't have food, clothing, and shelter,
Right.
shelter meaning housing, the rest of it's kind of irrelevant and doesn't have any impact. Said plainly, you can go to the best doctor on the planet and get the best drugs on the planet, but once you leave the doctor's office, if you go back to pushing your shopping cart down the street and don't know where your next meal's coming from, what's the point, right? It doesn't have an impact on your life. Housing is so important. I am among the litany of state bureaucrats that will tell you housing, we have to do more in the housing front. We have to make it accessible. Really want to take a look at why what we're doing isn't good enough today and think about how we can do better. There's got to be ways not to just continue to add to the price pressure on housing by increasing the amounts of the subsidies that we're giving people, but to actually build housing and address it on the supply side. But then I get on a personal philosophical rant and I should stop. But all three.
I'm mesmerized by it though, so that's okay. I think our audience is probably feeling very inspired. You could go on and on if you'd like. That's fine.
No, best we address the questions that matter to people.
Well, I do think that it's very inspiring to hear how all of these pieces sort of fit together. Your vision, strategy, you're actually giving us like pragmatic, strategic plans here, including a plan for inclusion, and how all of that fits together to create a more responsive and equitable system. So I just feel like we're in really good hands under your leadership. We're really excited, to hear more. So why don't we turn the topic now to equity, which has become such a cornerstone of Dee Dee's mission. I think really thanks to your leadership, equity is a stated priority at DDS. And, we're wondering how are you working to address disparities in service access? And you talk about outcomes a lot. I very much appreciate that. But outcomes across race, language, and socioeconomic status.
Mhm. Oh, such an amazing topic. So, despite what we often say, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, that's actually the purpose of government. And people come to government often when they've exhausted other supports and services that are available to them in their lives, friends and family, their job status change, whatever drives them to government for help. And government programs are supposed to meet their needs and treat everybody equally. That's an important part of the US Constitution. It's in the state constitution. Um, and at the same time, government also needs to realize that giving everybody a 10-speed bicycle treats everybody equally. But people are all different shapes, sizes, and health conditions, and not everybody's going to be able to use a 10-speed bicycle, right? So equity is also about getting people to the same point and recognizing their individuality. We've standardized the statewide, I'm talking in acronyms, IPP template, the individual program plan that people do every year that identifies their goals and how we're going to meet them. We do that in an individualized way. But when we have people who are similarly situated, they may have similar health conditions, living arrangements, employment situations if they're employed, we should be offering them very similar arrays of services to get them to the same point. And we find our system doesn't always succeed in doing that, frankly. There may be geographic differences, there may be economic differences that make different service types less available than others. So all of those things need to get measured. You mentioned timeliness. This is a really tough one, right? So today in the regional center system, we have 21 regional centers, and we probably have 25 different ways of measuring intake timeliness alone, for example, right? So do you measure intake? When does the clock start? Just to give an example. The clock could start when mom calls the regional center asking for services. The clock could start when the regional center calls them back. The clock could start when they agree on a meeting date for an IPP meeting. It could be after the date of their first assessment for eligibility. And when does that clock stop for intake? Is it at the IPP meeting when everybody signs and agrees that this is what we're going to do? Or is it the day that the first service actually begins to be delivered to somebody? So a couple years ago in 2023, the legislature enacted Senate Bill 138. And it required a number of things for California, and one of them was a number of processes to be standardized. And while we talk about standardizing the intake process, standardizing how a service provider becomes vendored, standardizing statewide the assessment that's used for respite services, we often forget these are equity initiatives because until we measure things consistently the same way for everybody, we don't have a good way to compare. So what we're seeing is a lot of infrastructure investment before we can get there. But we've also engaged, we think we have decent data for about 9 different topics. 4 of them are spending, and some of them are other things like employment, percentage of people who want a job who actually have one, where we think we can split that by, race, we can split it by age, we think we can split it by eligibility diagnosis, and also by the type of residence that somebody lives in, whether they're at home with family or in assisted living. And so we think there are some promising measures that we can do, and we're really proud to, in the last year, have begun to engage stakeholders on what we can do to start.
Yeah.
I'm in danger of exceeding the list of my first answer to you, so I better stop there, but it's also exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm particularly excited about this. Anything sort of data related, I just like geek out on. I love that. And it's so important, really. I mean, it really can't underscore how important it is to understand, to standardize things so that we really understand where we're at,
Mhm.
and where we need to go, and then to measure that over time. Did we get there? What do we need to do differently? Like you can't do that without all that data. So it's one of the things I really admire about your approach to DDS and to improving our systems is really taking a look at that data. I feel like you've been trying to say you're not a data geek, though. I feel like I've heard you say that a few times. I don't know. I'm a little skeptical. I think you might be.
It's possible.
Possible. All right. Well, lots of promising things to hear there. Building on that, I guess, what kind of promising practices or models are emerging across California to better serve historically under-resourced communities?
This one is slightly trickier. I think one of the infrastructure investments that we've done in the last year and a quarter or so in California was for the first time, we took the 21 regional center databases of their service providers
Mhm.
and we created a statewide provider directory. Now, I know many in the audience might consider the provider directory to be a cuss word, but it's actually enabled us for the first time to have a single list of who's providing what services and where they're providing it. And we're going to continue to build that out to get their language capacity, their capacity to serve people, some basic info about the wages that they pay and those kinds of things. We're really now finally going to look at where services are available, where they're not available, and instead of just relying on, we feel like maybe we need more of this when we make investments to expand the provider network. We think we can do it in a, sorry, data nerd, data informed way, based on what we know about what's available and where it's available and what the barriers are. So I think just expanding provider access alone in a really targeted way helps. We're also able to look at service authorization and utilization
Mhm.
by different communities in California. That kind of work is ongoing, and I already talked a little bit about the development of some measures that begin to work on that. But there's a lot of opportunity here to be more fair, to be more, to get to equity. I don't want to say equality, but to equity, for people. There's a lot of work yet to be done here.
I mean, it's sort of surprising that that database didn't exist before, right? And I'm sure anything can always be improved upon, but it's a really good example of, innovation driven by equity, and access. So, another key piece of equity is ensuring that people with lived experience have a seat at the table. And I've heard you talk about, nothing about us without us, and we love that saying. And so, how is DDS elevating the voices of self-advocates and families from all across the state of California, particularly in decision making?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm not going to reiterate what I said previously. Across the board, we're both trying to share more info with people, but also collect it from them on more topics. We're doing more webinars that kick off public input sessions and those kinds of things. And we're also trying to do a lot of this work. Historically, in our system, we've always talked in English and maybe in Spanish if we were lucky. We're trying more and more to have everything that we do in at least six languages. So Chinese, Tagalog, Vietnamese, and Korean are being added. We have a language access plan. If you go to our website and type in language access plan, it pops up there. And we have a list of vital documents and other info that we're doing, but really trying to get everything that we put out that's of importance to the community to empower people to get engaged and then also to listen to them. And aside from those public input processes, and appreciate your team dropping the link to the lowest input opportunity there. Um, we've also for years had what we called a consumer advisory committee at the department. And they've been a great resource to us, but it languished a little bit, and we had at one point 8 or 9 people. We now have over 35 people, and we've rebranded this the Lived Experience Advisory Group. And a lot of the documents that we're now issuing as policy papers go to them, not just for plain language review and understandability, but input on whether they think those things work. They've been involved in the Lowest project. They've been involved in the respite tool. They've been involved in some of our employment ideas. So we're continuing to have this dedicated group coming along with us for the ride. And importantly, too, I think this year we're also finally able to compensate them for the time that they're spending doing this. It's no longer some volunteer gig. They're paid just like the rest of us are for their input and involvement. So all of those things I think are part of that. And really proud to continue to iterate on what we can do better. Nothing about us without us is really important. Thanks for recognizing that.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard you say that many times. So sorry to take it away. Glad you got to say it too. don't want to steal your quote there. It's really clear that DDS is working really intentionally to make the system more inclusive, and I think that's very, very encouraging. So I'm going to shift us over though now to a different topic, sort of related to innovation, and you got into this a little bit with some of the pragmatics around technology, and really we're kind of curious to know a little bit more about how the system is adapting to meet the needs of today and tomorrow. And so we often hear that the system isn't broken, but it's outdated. And so, in your opinion, what are the most urgent areas where California's developmental services system really needs transformation? And I know you talked about the tech stuff, which is really important, but I wonder if there's other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. The tech is certainly there. The lowest project, as you referenced, so I won't repeat what we've already covered. There are a couple others. I think we need to continue to look at compensation for the workforce. People kind of half jokingly say we've been in a workforce crisis for the last 30 years. We need to figure out what's working to get a stable and competitive workforce in our developmental services array. Um, Also, our training infrastructure. I know this is another IT effort, but we're working very closely with Sacramento State University to build a learning management system, or in English, a training tracker, where the workforce can go and take courses, get credit for those courses, potentially increase their wages as a result of completing those courses. And I think that results, people see a career ladder, it's a little more stable, and it translates into more stable relationships with the individuals and families that they support too, which leads to better outcomes. Other areas, there are kind of cool things that I won't go on and on about. We have a tech pilot going with Alta Regional Center, and we have, I think, 28 people in that. And we're exploring things that, everything from innovative alarms that let you know when somebody's at your door if you're deaf and hard of hearing and can't hear a knock or a doorbell, to things that will like automatically turn off your stove after 5 minutes so that you don't leave the gas running, right? It's a safety issue. Or equipping some people in the pilot are using iPads to connect to support people remotely, either for reminders to do things or take their medication, but also on call to ask and answer questions for them, where you don't then have to have somebody sitting in your house in case you need them for support. So there's some really innovative things like that happening too. And I'm sure there's a longer list, but also excited as well. And we have a lot to learn in that respect from other states, including places like Tennessee, that we believe are really ahead of us in thinking about how those kinds of technology solutions can improve people's independence and quality of life.
Yeah, I love hearing about these innovative kind of pilot programs and cross-sector collaborations. And I love how involved you are with all of that and so aware. It's exciting, to hear that kind of forward-thinking kind of perspective. And those examples really highlight how, creative partnerships can really drive meaningful change in people's lives.
Mhm.
So very exciting. Well, next I'd like to explore some emerging needs and policy priorities that are shaping the field. So how are you addressing the increasing number of individuals who are dual diagnosed? Okay, so what that means, of course, for our audience is that someone might have a developmental disability and some other condition like a mental health issue. And how is DDS addressing the need for coordinated behavioral and mental health support?
So I'm going to preface my comments here to say this is probably one of the topics that I know personally the least about. Having said that, in the last year and a half, I've heard a lot about this topic. I've made it this far without mentioning the master plan for developmental services, and I should have included that in a really massive way. We heard from a lot of people in California about what they want from our system. But behavioral and mental health support was a huge part of the feedback that we got. People want more, they want better training, they want access to more professionals. And I think this one is also one where maybe DDS has a little bit less control over what happens than we otherwise might like to. And that's because, as payer of last resort, much of this service and support is provided by Medi-Cal in California, the county mental health system, others that we don't directly have authority over and have to partner with. And yet at the same time, we're the payer of last resort for. So I think there's some complicated dynamics here that need to be worked through.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that sounds like a recipe for a partnership, and it sounds like you've, shown a pretty good track record for that. So maybe we can ask you more about that next year. But exciting to think about, the integration of mental health and developmental services. It's such a critical topic and one that a lot of people are concerned about. Another issue that's gaining more attention is aging. So, how is DDS addressing the needs of individuals with developmental disabilities as they and their caregivers grow older?
We heard a lot about this in the master plan development process as well, but we also heard about this well before that happened too. Several years ago, we created a new service. We call it a new service code, but a new service available for people called coordinated family supports. And among the things that that service was able to do was to help with transition planning. And so there are two things going on here that I think are really important. One, that service allows people to actually figure out, okay, I've been living with mom and dad my entire life, but they're 85 years old now, and I'm 60. When
Mhm.
something happens to them, we're all eventually going to pass away at some point. What does that mean? And so that coordinated family support service really helps people think through that, thinks through the available options, reviews the available, other members of the family, other siblings, what's available as an option there. There's a tangent to that that also involves a lot of work around looking at alternatives to conservatorship for people where supported decision making or other things offer opportunities to continue to support people to make choices about their own life without giving somebody like legal control over somebody else's life. So I think that's one real exciting one. And then to really explicitly address this, the new statewide individual program plan and the
Mhm.
guides for individuals and families that help them prepare for those meetings,
Mhm.
they now reflect the fact that at age 18 and every year after, there's a section in there about future planning, right? You may care less about that if mom and dad are 40 and you just turned 18. But
Mhm.
there's a section now in the IPP that gets revisited annually that provides an opportunity for discussing exactly this topic. Kind of what future proofing needs to happen, what future planning needs to happen. And so that's there as a recurring now part of that process. And I think it's a really important consideration. We heard for years about the silver tsunami, and we're in the middle of it now. We do have an increasing number of aging caregivers, and more of our population is staying at home in their life. So the combination of the two makes this a really important topic. And those are two, I think, really important aspects about planning for that.
Yeah, I really appreciate the thought that's going into all of this. And it really does sound like DDS is really considering all of the concerns of our community and of course, aging is a big one. We haven't talked a lot about policy. I'm sort of interested in from a policy lens, as you see it. What legislation or policy changes are on the horizon that could maybe have the biggest impact on the developmental disability service system in California?
I think at some point there will be I'm going to start small. There will be legislation around the lowest system so that all regional centers statewide are using a consistent
Yeah.
We want a consistent experience for individuals and families. So I think that will be a direct change for individuals and families and how they interact with the system overall. Then there, I think, are some state policy things around regional center funding and oversight and accountability that if we can get to a point where we're adequately funding them to meet expectations, then it's also fair to talk about what happens when expectations aren't being met. And I think that because because regional centers are the central point of contact for many individuals and families with the system, that too will have an impact. And then just to go negative a little bit about this, I've said several times in our chat this morning already, we're the payer of last resort after other things have been exhausted. And what we're seeing now at the federal level, I think holds a lot of danger for our population. The cuts to what the federal government calls Medicaid and we call Medi-Cal in California mean that while Medi-Cal provides so many services and supports for us
Mhm.
today, and it's 37% of the funding that we get for our system overall for people enrolled in Medi-Cal, even when they get regional center services. If they're in Medi-Cal, we can get a portion of their service costs covered by the federal government as well. So reductions to Medi-Cal trickle down to less funding for us,
Yeah.
but because we're the payer of last resort, if they can't get it from Medi-Cal, then we have to pay for it in our system at 100% state cost. And I
Mhm.
think that exposure is really a dramatic risk. And so I'm talking a lot about protecting the entitlement to services. And I'm
Mhm.
hoping really strongly that our partnerships can advocate so that we're not talking about an entitlement to a little bit less for everybody as a result. So that one I think scares me the most.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone. I think you're probably echoing what a lot of people are feeling. And I guess as a follow-up to that, do you have any recommendations of what people can do on an individual level to fight back?
Yeah, well, I have to be careful, right? So I'm salaried and I'm not here to tell people to advocate one way or the other. But if you have opinions about this subject, you absolutely should get your voices heard, either directly to your members in Congress or to the federal administration, one way or the other, or through advocacy organizations, sharing your stories, explaining to people what it would mean if such and such was no longer available to you. Those personal stories really connect with people. I can stay here and say, hey, we're jeopardizing 30% or 37% of our system's funding. Nobody cares. But when they understand the impact that that will have on your life, if you got 1/3 of your stuff taken away from you,
Mhm.
that resonates with people. It sticks in their minds. It's those stories that really help. And so, whether you have a story about loving what you have or whether you're worried about a specific budget proposal, get your stories out there and get them heard. Make it real. You know?
I think that is such that's such good advice. I think it really does come down to the stories and making it real for people. Yeah. Well, it's clear that there's a lot of important work happening both within the DDS system and across the state government to really anticipate and respond to kind of these evolving needs. So that's very encouraging. Before we open it up for audience questions, I'd just like to close with a few reflective questions. Now, I know earlier you said that you don't have a crystal ball, but if you had a magic wand, and you could implement only one systemic change tomorrow, what would it be?
I am going to sound like a broken record. If I waved my wand and could magically implement the lowest system tomorrow in a way that accounts for the organizational and process changes that regional centers and individuals and families have to successfully make to use it successfully, and it came off without a hitch and worked perfectly for everyone, that's my one dream, my one magic
And
wand.
it sounds like you're making that happen too. So that's very exciting. And again, we're looking forward to hearing more updates on that. And it's a great answer. I mean, I think it's a wish that many of us share. So, all right, another reflective question. What gives you hope about the future of services for people with developmental disabilities in California?
I've talked about this one too. More and more, whether it's driven by defense against what I'll call federal nonsenses, or whether it's just the improved sharing of information and communication, the partnerships in California that are forming are just tremendously impactful. The department doesn't do anything alone. A regional center doesn't do anything alone. One of the 500,000 people that we serve and support on any given month alone, they don't make things better for everyone. We have to do all of this together in partnerships. And
Mhm.
I really feel that people are pulling together in the right direction. And I hope that that continues.
Yeah. Well, that's very uplifting. I guess finally, another reflective question, then we'll open it up to our audience Q&A. So Pete, as you know, at the UCLA Tarjan Center, we host a leadership academy for emerging disability rights leaders with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And you were kind enough to speak to our emerging leaders and fellows last spring. We really appreciate that. And they were very inspired by your words, just as I'm sure our audience is right now. So, what advice do you have for the next generation of leaders working to strengthen the developmental disability system, whether they're self advocates, families, or professionals?
Oh, the opportunity to just provide my opinion on this. I would say a number of things. There are short terms and there are long terms. And I think over the long term, you have to realize that there are ups and there are downs, and what goes down comes up, and what's up goes down. So don't give up would be number one.
Okay.
Two, I would say um, get your voices and stories out there and be persistent about it. Those are the things that resonate with people. It's not facts and figures and government statistics. It's the individual stories and what it means for your lives that matter the most. I would also say it helps to have an agenda, right? Today, we talked about maybe 20 or 30 things, among many other things that need to get done. We need to prioritize what we work on, and we need to build partnerships to work on those things and get them done so that we can move on to the next thing. Because if you try to hammer 30 nails into a board, it's going to take you a really long time to get all 30 of them pounded in. But success is the first 3 or 4 nails pounded in so that you can get to the next one. So be strategic in your partnerships and your prioritization of what you want to see accomplished. And recognize there's a short term view, there's some immediate things that need to change, and there's some longer term stuff too. So keep those things in mind.
Yeah, really practical, kind of solution focused advice there. That's great. Well, thank you. So we're going to now open things up to a few audience questions. One of the questions we have for you, and I think it's probably on the mind of many, many people in the audience, is what impact do you foresee with all the budget cuts for the disability community?
It's really hard to predict what to say here. We are grateful that most of the budget cuts do not hit developmental disabilities directly, but they hit our population very directly. And what I'm talking about now are some of the requirements around Medi-Cal, what the argument we see nationally around Affordable Care Act healthcare premiums. People need healthcare. Um, And healthcare is one of the largest spending items in the federal budget, which makes it a big spending cut target as well. Um, and so, I don't know what the impact ultimately will be. I will share one tidbit what we're trying to do. For example, one of the Medicaid requirements coming up in the relatively near future, but not this year, are the establishment of work requirements to keep Medicaid. If you want to keep Medi-Cal, you have to be working or pursuing work. But there are important exemptions for that. And people with certain specified disabilities are exempt from those work requirements. And
Mhm.
so are caregivers of people with those disabilities. And so what we're exploring with the State Department of Healthcare Services is some way, while maintaining privacy protection, to transfer our information about who we are serving and who has intellectual and developmental disabilities
Mhm.
into the Medi-Cal file so they can tick a flag and note that if you're served by our department or a regional center,
Mhm.
you're pre-identified as exempt from those work requirements so
Mhm.
that you don't have to go to the county welfare office, the social services agency, every 6 months and reprove that you have a disability to continue that exemption to keep your health care. We want to alleviate that burden from individuals and families as much as we can by leveraging the data that we have available to us to prevent you from having to go to the doctor to document, a current letter or something. Like,
Yeah.
let's not put people through the pain to try to preserve what they've got. And so we're looking at creative solutions for those kinds of things. And then we can't predict. I mean, cuts to food assistance. We've been told just in the last 2 days that monthly CalFresh benefits for November are not loaded onto EBT cards in California because the federal funding is no longer available for those benefits. We don't know when that will be restored. We know that people who don't have adequate food suffer. We know people without adequate food have diabetical fluctuations in their care that drive them into the healthcare system. I don't know what those impacts are going to be like, but we're really worried about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everyone's very worried about it and
Mhm.
difficult to say what will happen, but it's good that you're
Yeah.
preparing.
Yeah.
This next question maybe is a good bridge from the last, and that is, are there any other states or countries which have systems in place that work well that we can learn from? And you started to allude to one earlier, so this is maybe a good follow-up to that.
Um, the answer to other countries, I risk getting political, but I would say that we are the only first world country on the planet that doesn't offer universal health care to its population. And we pay the highest per capita of any developed nation for the health care that we do have. And arguably in the first world, our healthcare outcomes are among the worst. So I think there's tremendous opportunity to learn what's working well in other places.
Mhm.
And really what that means is Medicare for all as a potential model to be considered. And I'm not advocating that on a policy basis, but observing that there may be opportunities to learn from the experience of others in those things.
Yeah, well said.
And then, micro level, just in employment, I've said we can do better.
Yeah.
And our team has been on a tour with 10 other states and our National Association of Developmental Disability Services Directors as well, listening to 10 other states, learning from them about what their employment programs look like and what they're doing. And we're hoping in the near future to adopt some of those, modify them if needed for California, and to see what we can do here to learn from others. So both big and small, I think there's some opportunities here.
That's great. You referenced the master plan earlier, and one of the questions from our audience relates to that. How is the master plan for developmental services going to be implemented in the next 10 years for the developmental services system? And maybe you can share a little bit about what the master plan is for those who are not familiar with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in a nutshell, the master plan for developmental services culminated a year-long process. We went around the state. We had monthly public input sessions. We had there was a master plan committee established of approximately 40 people. I think it was 38. And they had regular monthly meetings, and between those meetings, there was six standing work groups of about 100 people total. And there were public input sessions all through that, and really asking what is it that people want to see for the future of services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. As you might expect, regional centers were, of course, a part of that conversation. But I mentioned, behavioral health and Medi-Cal and education and transportation and housing and access to dental services. Lots of things beyond what the department and regional centers directly fund today were also part of those conversations. The master plan was released at the end of March 2025, so about 6 months ago. And it's really a collection of the voice of what people want to see. It's grouped around six different themes. It's online and available. It's a lengthy read. It's about 180 pages or so. It's available in six different languages, which I listed off earlier. Um, and it's really hard to know where you're going if people haven't told you that. So, really foundational. What it wasn't was a deliberate action plan that said we're going to do among its 167 recommendations. It doesn't say we're going to do these three first, and then those three, and then those three, right? Because nobody wants to pick between housing and employment as the favorite thing they work on. We're actually able to walk and chew gum at the same time. But it doesn't lay out timeframes. It doesn't appropriate funding for additional investments. It doesn't assign work to individual groups or advocacy orgs or different state departments. So it's not an implementation plan in and of itself. But having said that, a number of the things that we've talked about today, the lowest project, the standardization of intake, the standardization of how vendors get approved, the expansion of different service types. There's lots of topics that are covered. Employment was a big subtopic in there too. Um, I think I answered your question. Maybe all
Yeah.
I did was describe the master plan, but yeah.
No, I think that you answered the question. Thank you for that. There's also a lot of questions in here about rate reform.
Mhm.
And I'm going to kind of combine some of them here for you, but what do you foresee regarding DDS and rate reform, and how will it affect programs like Early Start and the services provided to families? Others are also asking about rate reform related to jobs being available in the future. So if
Mhm.
you could, cover a bit of that, that would be helpful.
Rate reform as a thing started 10 years ago. There was a law enacted by the legislature that required the department to study rates and issue a rate reform report to the legislature recommending changes and updates. That report was delivered to the legislature in 2019.
Mhm.
And finally, the legislature and administration appropriated funding to begin its implementation. The first rate increases were provided in 2022 and then 2023, and minimum wage went up in the middle of that along the way. And then January of 2025 was the final update to that. Rate reform also required the department to review and adjust rate models. Obviously, 2019 the report included a bunch of rate models for the different services, from early intervention for early start to transportation to the rates we pay for employment support service providers. And so we're continuing to look at that. We've had a year-long engagement across the board with lots of providers. We know that 2019, things have changed since then. The cost of insurance has gone up, for example, and the rate models don't reflect the fact that insurance for drivers, insurance for homes, insurances for buildings where people are providing services have all gone up. So we're reviewing and adjusting rate models. I envision that we'll be doing that into the indefinite future. We're also required every 2 years by legislation to update the rate models. We're not required to actually fund those rate models because that requires an appropriation by the legislature that's signed by the governor every year in the budget. but at least we'll keep track of what we think we should be paying to cover the costs of providing the service. And the providers that you mentioned are all included in rate reform. Not every provider type is in rate reform, but again, it's a multi-billion-dollar investment, not just in the providers that receive the rates, but in their ability then to compensate the workforce, which is what really matters. Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of the workforce and employment, which I know is a very important topic for you, you really emphasize that a lot in your vision. One of the questions from our audience members is they've mentioned that they've seen a lot of challenges since we eliminated subminimum wages. What they thought was a step forward led to thousands of their peers losing their jobs. So, what plans are in place to help restore jobs and opportunities?
Yeah, and this really, I think, gets to the things that we're learning from other states about how we can provide better incentives to employment. So whether it's the standard individual program plan explicitly tracking now who wants employment, we can use that to see who actually has employment. It's a good baseline start, but it's an important infrastructure step, knowing whether somebody wants a job. And then figuring out how we get assistance to them. Very often they have to go to Department of Rehabilitation for employment supports before the DDS or regional center system can support. And so we really value partnerships again with both our employment services provider community, but also with Department of Rehab, talking about what opportunities we have to kind of transform our system into, it's overused term, but I'll say no wrong door. The fact we know that you need a job and want a job, we should then jump to helping you get the job. And the bureaucrats should figure out who has to pay for it behind the scenes. We shouldn't be sending people over there to be sent back here, to be sent back there.
Yeah.
All of those kinds of things are unnecessary delays. So there's a number of things there. Our team on employment is more than expanding in the next couple of months and more than doubling in the next couple of months. And already the existing team has kind of been, and we're grateful for partnerships on this too. Lots of providers who are doing innovative stuff are saying, come visit us. So we've put our team on the road to learn from what people are doing that's successful and think about how those things can be scaled up. It's a promising area. No concrete results yet, but maybe if you'll have me back next year, we'll have something concrete to talk to.
Absolutely. You're more than welcome to come back next year, and I'm sure we'll have some great updates to share. And I really appreciate your interest and your support around employment. It's definitely a priority of what we do at the Tarjan Center. It's something that we're, really dedicated to changing in the state and beyond. And so it's really nice to also see that that shared value in you and in DDS.
And that was probably my missed opportunity to thank you and your team specifically, because some of the employment ideas we've gotten have been from repeated conversations and information and documents you all have shared with us. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Thank you for even reaching out to, again, collaborate. I think that's a theme that I'm hoping our audience is hearing here, that with you at the helm of DDS, there's new partnerships being built and these kind of community connections that I think are really just going to strengthen all of the services and supports that are available to individuals with developmental disabilities across California. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
We have another question from an audience member that mentions, as there's been this push towards community integration, which is a very important change in services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. However, they're sort of pointing out that these changes in services are, in fact, leaving maybe some with higher support needs a little behind and creating a system that can't support them. And these people are often left behind, having to stay home with parents who have to quit their jobs. And so these are kind of the concerns. But the question is, what kinds of programs will DDS push forward to address this disparity in service needs?
I think there are a variety of circumstances and situations that can lead to those. It could be geographical, it could be economic. I think at its core, knowing what individuals want for themselves is the first step. And I think the IPP goes there. I think then building out an appropriate array of services that are both linguistically, culturally, but also outcome focused and acceptable is really important. And then figuring out where we go from there. I do hear more often than I would like to that the fact that somebody is receiving, for example, federal SSI or SSDI benefits
Yeah.
has created a household dependency on that income for the payment of rental support, which then makes it really hard for somebody who wants to move out from mom and dad to do so. And I think those dynamics are really hard to crack, and probably not just within the DDS environment or the regional center environment to crack. We certainly want to support people in the community. We want them to enable them to pursue their desires, their intended life goals, the outcomes that they want to see improvements in. But we don't control so many of the other things that make a holistic package of supports around somebody. It can be federal benefits, whether it's Medi-Cal and food. It could be CalWORKs assistance. There's IHSS as an optional Medi-Cal benefit. There's lots of things that go into making up what somebody needs to be independent that's kind of beyond our own control. So I feel like that's a very weak answer, but hopefully also honest.
I think no weak answers here. Very honest, and I would also add very pragmatic. Everything that you've been saying today is actionable, and sort of makes sense in a practical way. It's funny. Sometimes you hear you're not a politician. I'm not going to put you in that category, but sometimes you hear politicians and they sound so eloquent and everything they sound so great, and then at the end you don't really know what they said. You're not really walking away with anything, and I think that's not happening here today, that you're actually giving people a lot of practical information and a vision for your plans for DDS moving forward. We have one more question from the audience. And this person says, thank you, Pete, and the California Department of Developmental Services for your insights during today's session. Your focus on advancing equity and outcomes across the developmental services system is key. As they reflect on your remarks, they say they're curious whether there are entities, government, corporate, et cetera, or community-based organizations that may not currently have a seat at the table, but could contribute meaningfully to this vision, particularly those rooted in lived experience, cross-system collaboration, and family engagement. This person says they're a huge fan on cross collaborations and system change. So I guess you guys kind of speak the same language there.
They're asking whether I can list off organizations that aren't in regular contact with us already, which is a little bit hard. So I'm going to take it this way.
Okay.
My first name dot last name at dds.ca.gov is my email address. I am happy to take suggestions of people to talk to. More perhaps usefully, I would suggest that people who want to engage with us do two things. One, check out the department's homepage on the internet. We have lots of engagement opportunities right there on the homepage. There's an events section. You can see what all the upcoming opportunities are. And then, that's for everybody in the audience, not just the people that might want to engage with us that haven't yet. And the other, there's a link there to our public affairs team. And uh, the email for them is info@dds.ca.gov, info@dds.ca.gov. And we are always happy. My team, frankly, is probably sick of me at this point saying the more voices and input that we have to something, the better the final outcome is. And we want to capture as many of those voices as we possibly can. So, Jennifer, I think just posted what I said in the chat. Thank you, Jennifer. She's been amazing, by the way, Liz,
I
in
know.
support. So keep her around, please.
I know she's incredible. We are very grateful to Jen Arnold. Thank you. I guess I'd love to give you kind of the final word here. I mean, you've provided a lot of inspirational vision for the future of California and the DDS system, and you've provided a lot of practical suggestions and directions that you hope to take DDS in. And I guess what would you like to share kind of as your final thoughts with our group here today?
Well, my team is a little tired of me hearing saying this, and maybe you will be too. But with an intended dose of reality, um, government sometimes moves slower than we want it to. I would encourage folks to be patient. And in an attempt at humor, I would remind folks, and this applies not just to government, but to your own daily lives. Sometimes the secret to happiness is low expectations. I'm kidding. But no, but seriously, what we do matters. We take it seriously. This has a direct impact on people's ability to live the lives that they want to do. We will get there. We want to get there in ways that work for most people in the system. We also don't want to leave too many people behind. And when we do, we want to remember that they're there and still come back to them to see what we can do to address their unique circumstances. We're trying, and it takes a partnership, and I'm just grateful to so many people who've supported what we're trying to do and brought ideas to what we should be doing. And going forward, these things will happen, they will get better, and we will continue to iterate. There's no point in doing things if they don't make a difference. We need to be able to measure that they're making a difference and be prepared to adjust so that they do. I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to come talk today to you and your team. They made this very easy for me to just show up and talk today. Um, really grateful for the opportunity to be here and talk. Thanks so much.
Oh, well, we are so grateful to you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to share with you your vision for DDS and the future. Um, Unfortunately, we are out of time. I could talk to you all day, but thank you so much again for again sharing your insights and your vision for DDS. It's been a very inspiring and I think thought-provoking conversation about where we've been, and I appreciate that you gave that context, right? Also where we're headed. That was the purpose of today's discussion, and how DDS will play a role in building a more inclusive and equitable future for Californians with developmental disabilities. So thank you, Pete. I'd also like to thank our audience and to all the community members, self-advocates, and advisors who helped, create the questions today and whose voices really helped to shape our discussion. As a reminder, you can hear a plain language podcast episode with Pete and our international disability rights advocate, Russell Lehman. It's available on Spotify or on the UCLA Tarjan Center website. You can find the link posted in the chat. And we're now going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to hear from our distinguished panelists on employment. This is a topic you care very much about, right, Pete? Employment for people with intellectual and neurodevelopmental disabilities. So we'll be back at 10:45. But once again, thank you so much, Pete, for a really interesting and inspirational conversation.
Thanks again for having me. You and your team are fantastic, and I appreciate the
Oh,
audience as well taking time to hear us out.
thank you.